have arrived at episode 73 of Our Town with Troy By, where I have interesting conversations with interesting people. And today's guest, this week's parts 1 and 2, is no exception to that, as I interviewed Christina Meredith, who is the author of Cinder Girl. That's a memoir of her life, and it is an incredible story. I read the book twice in preparation for the interview. She came in with her husband, John, and their little daughter, who is 1 year old, Braylon, on a Saturday in the studio, and got a chance to meet her face-to-face and essentially walk through her life in this book that she wrote. Amazingly, to me, as I told her in the interview, the physical abuse came at the hands of her mother. I thought it would have been from a father or a male figure. However, later, sadly, she accounts the sexual abuse that came at the hands of her uncle. All the names in the book were changed to protect, and there was an extensive legal review in which much of the book was taken out, but she hopes that a movie will be made one day, and the full truth, if you will, and everything that she intended to put in the book will come out in that movie. But in short, we will move through her childhood and the abuse that was there, to living in her car and being homeless for a number of years, and then being discovered in a Whole Foods in Santa Monica, California. Discovered in the sense of someone approaching her and suggesting, hey, you should be in beauty pageants. And she looked into it and became and crowned Miss California in 2013. So the triumph is amazing. The strength is amazing in talking with her. She has been interviewed many times, so I was very thankful. And not just interviewed many times, but on extremely high-profile TV shows, networks, other podcasts, if you will, throughout the country. So honored to have Christina spend some time with me and to share her story, which on her platform that she ran as Miss California was reform of foster care. As we continue to tell the story of North Alabama, and as I mentioned to Christina, we have had many guests on, whether they were adopted themselves or through the foster care system. We had an episode on the National Children's Advocacy Center. As you're going to see in this book, if you read her book, Cinder Girl, or just listening to this interview, mental health. We've had a few episodes with guests where we've addressed mental health. All of this essentially comes into play, and Christina now resides here in Huntsville with her husband John and their little daughter Braylon. So it's a powerful episode. I hope you'll enjoy it. Again, we will start with part 1 and part 2, and essentially walk through her life. At the end of part 2, Christina talks about the legislation that she is trying to push. She had tried to run for representative in Florida and in the Jacksonville area. Was unsuccessful in that, but there has been some success in a bill that she was proposing called Christina's Law, whereby essentially a death penalty is the maximum sentence given to those who rape young children and sexually abuse those under the age of 12. You will hear her very upset, through the justice system as she tells her story on reforming not only foster care, but reforming the justice system when it comes to the punishments that are levied or not levied on sexual predators. So I hope you will enjoy these 2 parts to the episode, and continue to like, subscribe, rate the show. Trying to put out a lot more shorts on YouTube, so check those out. Going back through a lot of prior episodes and pulling out some good clips and content if those were lost in people not checking out the full episode. And then also shout out to Riley Zepp, who is my intern this summer from Auburn University. He's continuing to work to put segments of the shows out on YouTube. So hope you continue to enjoy it and spread the word. Christina Meredith is here, and she has been interviewed many, many times all over this country. and most recently, even back in my home state of Virginia and down in Lynchburg, right? Or not Lynchburg. You were in you were at Liberty University.
Yeah.
And is that Lynchburg? No, it's not Lynchburg, is it?
Yeah.
It is in Lynchburg.
Is.
Okay. I don't know what I'm confusing it with. I've
I've
been there.
2 months ago I spoke at Convo.
We have some pictures I'll show later, but you are very recognized for the platform you have. And what is difficult is like, gosh, where do you even start? I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, where do we start in this story? There's the notably Miss California in 2013. Yeah. But do you start there? No. You have to start at the beginning in a way, right? Like, I don't think there's any way around it as far as you have to set the stage and provide all the context. Because if you start at Miss California, in which your platform is all about reforming foster care, well, why is she passionate about foster care, right? And then you'd have to start the story back, and then even further back. Well, how'd she end up in foster care? Well, we got to go back. So I don't think there's any way to escape that. This will touch heartstrings, right? This conversation, and I'm assuming that just about every show you've been on has been somewhat of a moving experience for those involved, whether those are the hosts interviewing you or people in the studio.
I would hope so.
Right?
They always want it to mean something.
What's the percentage of those who interviewed you that actually read your book?
I'd say quite a bit.
Really?
Yeah. Most podcast interviews and most speaking events that when people hire me, they like to read my story. And then they, like Convo, they gave out my book to their students. And that happens a lot where people read my story, and that's how I end up speaking during interviews or doing speaking events. So I think quite a bit do.
Well, and I think
more do than don't.
Really? Mm-hmm. Certainly makes sense. Like on the podcast side, like we should have time. If you're recording something, right, there should be plenty of time to prepare for that guest.
Well,
now,
you want to know your guest, right? And if you have a book, it's such an easy way to get to know them.
Might have to give a pass if you're on Good Morning America or the Today Show.
Yeah, they probably didn't.
Someone gave them the Cliff Notes version, or your agent, or
my
whatever.
Publicist probably gave them the little. Yeah, exactly. That's how that goes.
But I will tell you first as commentary before we get into the book. I listened to it on Audible. I'm one of those people that I came from a commuting background where I commuted for years, minimum an hour a day. Well, it was average an hour every time I commuted. It didn't matter if it was 15 miles in the D.C. area or 50 miles. Brutal. It was 1 hour each way. So you got used to. I got used to not relying on. I didn't have time, I guess, when I got home to crack a book because I'd already spent 2 hours in the car every day. So I got used to.
So wise way to spend your time.
It is, right? Do something. And now I listen when I go running or the little bit of a drive I have between here and when I go into the office. But I just enjoy it. Like that's a habit for me. Yeah. Is to listen to stuff. So your book is very well written.
Thank you.
And it is very. I was listening to a podcast of these two folks that I think did some work up for your foundation, and they had both read it and were kind of doing a book review. And
that was a couple, right?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I think they were together. I don't know if she was a guest host or something.
No, they're a married couple.
And their reaction was the same. I mean, you're on your edge of your seat. You good movies and TV shows and books bring in, there's character development, and immediately you're just immersed in this story, and you're afraid of what's going to happen next after you kind of find out what's going on. And it's like a page turner in the sense, right? Or you can't stop listening.
I've heard it's a quick read.
It goes by very fast. This episode is brought to you by TPG. TPG is the founder of the quality assurance industry, and most known for the tagline, "This call may be monitored for quality assurance," which they brought to the call center market more than 26 years ago. They dominate the market with an internationally recognized client base of Fortune 500 brands. They have created the quality standards used by their clients and have defined 307 attributes that they measure to define a great conversation, including complex concepts such as skills associated with empathizing and rapport building with customers. For more information on TPG, visit them at tpginc.com. So I have questions on that, but let's just dive into, I want to do how about we just kind of step through this in context of like, let's talk about like New York a little bit, and maybe not like try to do an entire book review, but we'll just kind of summarize, I think, some of the key things that happened in New York, and then we'll kind of move to Florida, where you spent probably the balance of, or the majority of your upgrading years,
That's
right?
Where I'm from. It's my hometown.
But, you know, and what was surprising to me when, and shout out to John Salanto, who's a friend of mine, a former, I should say retired. Former means you're not getting paid. Retired means you're getting a pension. So John Salanto knows your husband, who's here in studio, and he texted me and said, hey, you really need to have Christina Meredith on your show. She wrote this book. She's got this amazing story. So here we are. So shout out to him.
Thanks, John.
And I would say when you hear about abuse, and we've had that in our family, I immediately thought it would be at the hands of your father, or just as the book starts, a male. And I was very surprised as we get into this, and like, well, no, the mother is the first of the perpetrators.
The devouring mother is a real thing.
And the basics is that you're from an Irish Catholic family, or Italian Catholic, and most of your siblings have the darker complexion, and they looked more like all they didn't look like your mother.
No, they all looked like my Guinea father.
Right.
Dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair. I'll send you some photos so you can bleep it in the.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Flash them in, and
Please.
It's crazy. I have one right here, ready, available, and you can just look at the difference. It's just uncanny. And so my mother was Irish. But there's me.
Oh wow.
There's my dad with all my siblings. That's right. And then look at that blonde hair.
That's you.
Like I stuck out in the crowd from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And through years of therapy, I found out, at least some of the psychologists and therapists I went to had told me that the reason my mother singled me out is because I looked like her the most. Mm-hmm. So when my mother grew up abused, and she grew up in and out of different transient environments, her mother was horribly abusive to her. And I think, you know, when you internalize it and you don't work on your junk and work on your trauma, it either devours you in the sense that you become a shell of a human being, mm-hmm. and depression rules you and you end up taking your life most of the times, or the trauma turns you into the beast that you hated. If that's what happens if you don't deal with it, in mm-hmm. my opinion, of mm-hmm. years of working in this area. And so I think my mother had decades of internalized trauma that she did not deal with, and so she became the beast that she hated. And so it was easy for her to look at me and project her own self-hatred onto me, because I'm the only one who looked like her. Yeah. And when I first heard that, I was 22 or 23, and I remember thinking, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But now, you know, a decade plus later as a mom, what I thought I understood about my mother, I now don't even understand anything, because I look at my daughter and I couldn't even imagine. Right. She cries too long and I get physically unwell. Like, I cannot even imagine allowing something horrible to happen to her. My entire life is centered around keeping her safe. Mm-hmm. You know, Braylon's got lots of allergies and dangers out in the world, like anywhere we go. To include Publix, last week we put her in the cart, and I forgot to wipe it down, and she wasn't wearing any pants. And so when we picked her up, she had horrible hives on her legs. Really? Because there must have been dairy. Some kid probably had a Go-Gurt or an ice cream, which she's anaphylactic to. And so it's just like, and I felt so guilty because that was me who just put her in that situation, when usually I'm on guard and, you know, hypervigilant to keep her healthy and safe. So my perspective as a mom, now looking back at my own mother, I'm like, I don't understand how she could hate me so much. Yeah. But it's because she had all this undealt with trauma, and, you know, you either become what you hate, or it destroys you and you take your life. And that is how I've seen over the last few decades of working in this field of abuse with kids. You know, the thought that just came to me the other day, I don't know, you exercise, right? You're fit. Yeah. It's been a hard time this last year as a new mom trying to exercise, but we do go walking in the morning, and I've got my bands that I just started doing again. But prior to pregnancy and being a mom to a baby, yes, I would hit the gym 3 to 5 times a week. John and I, as you can see, my husband is still very much active in the gym. But for me as a new mom, it's the last place. Like, you know, carrying her around and doing all the things with chores and stuff is the exercise that I get at the moment.
For me, it's always like I'll just have these thoughts, these revelations, right? When you're working out, you're running, and so I was running the other day, and I was like, you know, this would sound crazy, but I would love to do an episode with you where we just kind of read the book, and then we stop and say, can you comment on that? Because there's hundreds of moments through the book where it's like, 1 minute, just can we just talk about this for a second? Right at the beginning, what happened to your mother?
Yeah.
You know, and I know maybe that wasn't the purpose of the book, was to go into all of your mother's upbringing, and did the level of abuse even rival in what she put on you?
No, I don't think it did from what I know. But again, you can deal with what traumatized you as a child, or you can let it destroy you, or you can let it turn you into a monster. And that you get 3 choices: deal with it and heal, to become the antithesis, which is what I chose to do. Don't deal with it and let it rob you of life and become completely depressed and dependent on drugs and all the things to numb yourself and essentially you not have a life. Or it consumes you and you become what you hate. You become a monster.
Yeah.
So I think with, my mom, I don't think she had the pain inflicted on her to the level that she did to me. But I can't say for certain because I wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
So, but she definitely grew up with some nastiness. But even still, yes, there's a reason she did abuse me and my siblings the way she did, but there's no excuse. Right, I'm an adult and I'm a mom now.
Yeah.
And I went through all kinds of horrible things, and I don't go around abusing other people.
Yeah.
I don't go around, being a victim and claiming that card. Well, I was homeless, or I was in foster care, or I was raped for years. Blah blah blah. No. That's not how we're designed to function, and that's not God's intent for us. When you go through hardships.
Yeah.
It's so much more fruitful if you turn it into something good.
Yeah.
It's so much better for the world, for the community, for your family, for your own self. I would not be where I am if I decided to be like my mother and be a victim.
Yeah.
And blame everyone else for all my problems. No, the reason I've been successful and I'm able to have a beautiful family is because I have owned my junk. And I'm like, I don't want to be that. I want to be productive. I want to be positive. I want to be loving. I want to be kind and have forgiveness and have all these things. And I credit that to my faith in the Lord. Jesus is basically my whole life outside of my husband and my daughter. So, he just gave me a different perspective. Reading scripture just gives you a different perspective on how you should handle hardship and suffering. So
we're going to come back. We're going to come back to that many times because there's a few experiences in the book that you mention or that you isolate, right, as tremendous spiritual experiences you had. But, I'm a child of the 70s and into the 80s, and our abuse I just thought it was standard in a way. And so as I was, and I think that's waned a lot in society, right? And now if you see a kid get hit in public, there's probably someone's going to probably do something about
Someone's
it, right?
calling CPS.
Yeah, and as a parent, even the way my kids look at me, they'll come and be like, yeah, go ahead and see what happens to you right now. That was not, I just thought it was the norm. So as I'm starting to listen to this book and hear about your mother's abuse, I was kind of thinking in my mind, okay, when is it that line is crossed? And a lot of that, so some of it must be the severity of the abuse, the emotional side of it, but then there's also neglect, right? And so, and I think that I'm intrigued in your story in a way because it's gonna help me. It's going to empower me to help others because we're always whether we should do it or not, we're kind of comparing circumstances.
Sure.
And sometimes we have to hear someone else's circumstance to be like, oh, wow, that really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
I certainly felt like early on that we were the only ones being abused, right? And it was just only happening to us, and everyone else has a good family. And then you kind of find out later, well, that may not be the case. But in the book, your mother the Cinder Girl title, it comes from this kind of Cinderella, where you're the one that is chosen to be the servant,
singled out for sure.
Right. Ultimately, there's 8 siblings that came from your mother and your father. She would have 2 more with a stepdad. We'll get to Herman later, but there's like 5 in the picture at the time when it seems to be the height of the abuse.
Yeah, when she first dubbed me the laundry lady.
Right.
When I was 7, and she'd always had picked on me before, but it was different. I remember that day just making my siblings chant laundry lady, laundry lady, laundry lady, and then they weren't allowed to call me by my name anymore, and then the names grew worse and worse and worse. And so I was at a young age when she singled me out, and I remember her hatred for me. I remember thinking about that as a kid, like, why does my mom hate me? I could never be good enough. I could never be smart enough. And I talk about this in the book when I drew a photo for her in school and I wrote the word love wrong. I'll never forget that. I can think of it in my brain like it happened yesterday when I handed her that piece of paper and love was spelled L-U-V instead of L-O-V-E. And she ridiculed me and ripped it and told me I was too good for nothing, too stupid to do anything. And, now I'm just I'm good for nothing except to do laundry, and I just, in context now, I think about that. And again, now that I'm a mom, I'm like, how could you, something must be in my mother, who's still alive, who I haven't seen since that day, Thanksgiving Day at 16. Something must be so broken in her to look at your baby, essentially. Like, I was 7, just a baby, just a tiny little thing. Like, how could you look at your little girl like that and just ridicule her and shame her? And I just can't even, my brain doesn't understand that type of wickedness, the type of disconnect, the type of dysfunction. Like, my mother is severely has mental illness.
Yeah. Did the emotional abuse start as early as like 4 and 5? Because I think I heard you say maybe the physical didn't start till around 6.
Yeah, the physical was later. The psychological, I would argue, and the emotional, by far throughout my childhood and into my teens, was significantly worse than any beating she ever gave me. And it did start earlier. The emotional withholding on purpose, and again, like, making my siblings chant things
demon
about
girl.
me, demon and stupid, and making them applause when she would be beating me. I mean, she was so cruel to them too. I mean, kids don't do that. I mean, she was teaching them to abuse me, and some of them did. But yeah, I'd say the emotional and psychological was started well before, and then the physical got worse. But that's how it works. I've learned in relationship and hearing other stories and traveling the country, and, my foundation, and working in the child rape trade and in, foster care. You hear these stories of abuse, and they're always the same. It always has a moment that it starts, and it's typically verbal or emotional or psychological first, and then it taps into physical, and then sexual. Yeah. So there's always like a gearing up almost to prepare your victim. But it always inevitably ends up into the physical or sexual place. So, yeah.
Was it, and this is what's interesting, like, our beatings came from when you just did something wrong, you need to pick up the room that you talk about. You're supposed to mop the floor. You'd never mop the floor. So certainly you're going to get, and she said, I'm going to, basically, if you don't do it right, then
without ever showing me,
beat you until you learn how to do it right.
I was getting a beating anyways. It didn't matter.
But then here on the other side, now it's like you bring home this picture. You talk about how excited you were to show your mom how hard you worked on this picture. And normally, when you have kids, I got 4 of them of my own. It's like, oh, okay, I guess we'll work on the spelling later in life. But this is cute, and good try.
Attaboy.
Right, but you still get beat for that. But was it daily? Was it weekly?
Yeah. It was daily.
Just every single day.
Yeah, I was definitely being abused every single day. I don't know if I was being beat up every single day. Certainly several times a week.
But just stupid girl and you.
But the psychological, emotional was an everyday occurrence, and I couldn't figure out. It took me. So even in the face of full blown rejection and hatred, a child will still search for the approval of mom and dad. Period. You can literally do what my mother did to me and tell me that you hate me to my face and beat me up and ridicule me and shame me and reject me over and over and over and over again. And I will still be desperate for mom and dad's affection and support and love, because that's how kids are wired. That's how kids are wired. That's why kids who get adopted seek out their biological parents, because it's in you to want that from your mom and your dad. Their approval, their love. And so it took me many years as an adult to finally release that, wanting my mother's love and approval, because I had to come to a place in my mind. She, one, wasn't capable, and I would never get it, because there's always this small hope, right, that maybe she'll come around. But it's not possible when you're dealing with mental illness. But again, that takes, you have to have, a child will never understand that. They'll just keep going back to the dog that bites them. Thinking the dog will change. But as an adult, you can mature and say, okay, that dog's gonna keep biting me, so I'm gonna lock the dog up and not go to that gate anymore.
So similar to what I was saying before about at what point did you realize this was unique, and this was not all kids, like I was saying before, like, all kids get spanked by their dad or they get yelled at, but how did you come across
Middle school.
This is rare? Or did you, so in elementary school, did you feel like, oh yeah, everyone's getting beat and called a demon and a whore or whatever when you're 7 or 8 years old?
No, but I was so, I didn't really know how to process relationship. I was so emotionally stunted. And in school, I was put out in the outside of the classroom because I was unhooked on phonics, because I was so developmentally delayed from all the abuse and trauma. And they didn't know I needed glasses. So for years, I couldn't see the chalkboard. So I was just so behind in so many different ways, whether they were, I couldn't see physically and with my mental
And you were scared
blocks.
to take home that letter indicating that Christina needs glasses.
Oh,
you had no idea.
No idea what they were saying. I just knew that my mother was going to beat me for it, and she did anyways, which I knew. Because anything that she could... I remember being a child thinking to myself, anything that she could use to justify hurting me, she's going to. I knew it instinctually. And so, hiding that note was such a waste, but I did try.
But your father received it.
He did.
Or at least he was around for that.
He did. He got it first, and I remember being so afraid. But yeah, he was gracious, and he was like, she needs glasses. She didn't do anything. And I'm like, oh, she ended up, my mother was going to beat me anyway, so it doesn't matter what I was going to do. But
were there any good moments? Like, was there a handful of...
I can't think of... I know it's so funny people ask me this about my mother. I honestly cannot remember any good moments with her, not one. And my father, yeah. My father had lots of good moments until they took him away and threw him in jail unconstitutionally.
We'll get to that.
But... my mother, even right now, I'm trying to go through the Rolodex of memory, and a lot of it is, disassociated, because of the trauma. I can't think of one moment where she held my hand or told me she loved me or made me feel anything positive. I can't, not one. Honest.
Can we talk about? You had made a comment in the book that one day you hope to take your family to Saratoga to the race, to the horse races and stuff, to the track and place bets and all that. Have you done that yet?
We haven't done that yet. It's on the list.
It's on the list.
We're very excited.
But that was so. Let's turn to your father a little bit. You said he was without faults. But for the most part, obviously, he was the positive influence in the home.
Yeah, my dad was. My dad's not a perfect man. He's a hot mess, but he's a good man. Now he's a broken man, but my mother broke him. For sure. But he was just a hardworking. He grew up in a very strong Italian Catholic family. He's the baby of 12.
Wow.
They all grew up upstate New York. And
you guys were just north of Albany.
Yeah,
is that where you were?
Schuylerville is where the house that we grew up in up until I was like 6 or 7 when we moved down to Florida. But we would always go to Lake Luzerne, Lake George. My uncles still have the Painted Pony Ranch up there. They
Okay.
still run the trails. You know, his brothers are still, my dad's up there right now with them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, I mean, that has been in generations for the last 3 generations up there is where him and his family's from. But yeah, so we grew up doing the Saratoga racetrack, and my dad did teach me how to bet a trifecta. It was so cool. I was so little. I was like, this is awesome. And I would just pick the coolest name.
Yeah.
But yeah, my father was just a hardworking, he's still a hard worker. I mean, my father, for all of his faults, he will work.
Yeah.
Not a lazy bone in his body. He will work. He will work. And that's all he's ever done is go to work. And
so what was going on when he went out of town? I was trying to piece this together. Was he like in the military? Was he in the reserves?
He was in the Army Reserves.
Okay, and that's what took him away.
So he would go and do training.
Right. A few times a month or
yeah,
once a month?
It just depends. I don't really know the cycle of his training, but he would go away for a few weekends a month with the Army and train. And then he also had a night job. I think he was a night auditor. And then he was running a coffee shop. He started our own coffee shop in Schuylerville, right below the hill. And so he was always working. I mean, my dad worked 2-3 jobs, and that's all I remember about him is that he was always working.
Just to provide.
He wanted his girls to be in Catholic school, so we went to St. Clement's Elementary up until my mother hustled all of us down to St. Augustine, Florida. But yeah, and when we saw him, it was always, who wants to go to the dump? Because back then, the trash didn't come to your house, at least out in that country area. He had to take the recycling and the trash to the dump. And so me and my little brother would always be like, we want to. Mm-hmm. So we would go with my dad. The best times I remember having with my dad was him driving us in our little bug mini van, Volkswagen van with the crazy sliding door that basically didn't work to the dump. And
did he take you to stop at like a 7-Eleven or something like that and get you a drink?
Yeah. So there's a penny candy store through Lake Luzerne that we would go through, and we would stop. There's also an ice cream store with this, it was called Dairy something, but it basically had this gigantic cow on top of the roof. Mm-hmm. Massive. And you sat outside to get it, and it was all gravel, so you gravel rolled up, and you'd walk up to the little window and you'd get your soft serve ice cream dipped in chocolate. It's my dad's favorite. And we would just sit in our van and we would eat ice cream and get it everywhere. And that was the best part of going to the dump, is my dad would always take us to get penny candy or ice cream. Yeah. And the other kids, I guess they didn't know the secret. But Chris,
go with that if you want to find out.
Yeah, but Chris and I knew the secret, and so we were like, we want to go take trash to the dump.
Chris meaning Christian? Was that?
Christopher.
Okay.
All the names in the book are changed, but
okay.
Christian in the book, yeah. It would be Christian in the book.
I do want to touch on the names, but I don't want to do it just yet. I'll get to that point. So did the abuse from your mother ever happen when your father was present, or was it always when he was absent?
No, it happened. It wasn't to the severity, but it happened in front of him. He knew. He knew that she didn't like me, and he would often try to be the buffer, but that didn't last.
And even though your brothers and sisters had to, your mother made them do things, call you demon girl and other things, right? Were there moments though that you had with them where gosh, Christina, I can't believe this is happening to you. I'm so sorry.
No, they were kids, so I don't know if they'd ever came to me with that type of emotional maturity. I don't think any of us had that. But we would play. We would play with our toys together, and we would go outside and we'd run together, and we would share snacks, So there were moments. I knew my brothers and sisters loved me. Yeah. But when Mom was around, they couldn't show that affection. They knew that, and I knew that, and and there was this unspoken knowing, and I'm not mad at. I would always look at them like, I'm not mad at you. I know that you'll get beat if you don't do what she says, because they would. So there's a few times my older sister tried to not do what she said when it came to me, and Ariel got her butt beat so bad, Mm-hmm. And that was an example to all the other kids. She was the oldest, so I mean it was just known.
Did your father apologize on your mother's behalf? at all for those things, when he knew the abuse was going on, whether he saw it?
He did later.
He did.
When I saw him again when I was 18 and 19, he did, but not when I was little.
Okay.
I think, knowing what I know now about my mother and my father was so in love with my mother. Like, to the point of, I'm going to ignore what's going on because I love this woman so much. He loved my mother so much, he lost all of his children. Mm-hmm. And when he figured that out, it was too late. And he was fighting behind prison bars to get us, realizing that he got totally duped by the woman that he was so obsessed with. My father has not been with another woman since 1996, since my mother.
Really?
Yeah. I mean...
just crushed him.
Absolutely soul crushed a human being. You know, and I think to my father's detriment, he loved her too much. And it cost him everything.
When did they meet? Like...
high school.
So they were high school sweethearts?
Yeah. Yep. High school sweethearts, and senior year, they got married and had a baby. And that was that.
Yeah, I think at some point we'll touch on the cycles of abuse, right? But mm-hmm. like, it's really, really hard to break the cycle when you start your life as a parent in stress, right? You're young. Yeah. And you have this child, and you don't really have a job, and you've got to work 2 or 3 jobs.
Yeah.
And it's constant stress and worry and trying to provide, and you're tired.
I think it would have worked out if my mother wasn't so insane. You know, my father worked, and he brought home money in order to take care of us, and she would take the money and she would spend it on
fur coats
and lobster dinners for herself. I mean, it sounds unbelievable, but it's exactly what she would do. I mean, he would come home after being gone, and the electricity would be shut off, because instead of paying the electricity bill, she would go out with her friends and leave us kids at home. My mother had like this entitlement type of attitude, because her parents grew up wealthy with her parents. Her real father passed away and gave her a boatload of money, which her mother ended up taking from her. And, you know, she grew up well-to-do. And when she didn't have that, and they didn't approve of my father, you know, it was just, she wanted a really luxurious lifestyle, and my father couldn't give her that. He could give her taken care of, and that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. So she had to live outside of the means, because that's what she wanted.
Yeah.
She wanted luxury.
Before we leave New York, is there anything you'd like to highlight from that period of time?
Upstate New York is beautiful. And I think when you say New York, people always think the city, and it's like, ugh, no.
No, it's the rest of New York. It's a beautiful state.
It is. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. And I think the few wonderful moments I had with my dad in upstate New York, I will always cherish. And, you know, going back there with my husband and my daughter at some point to go to the Saratoga races is going to be magical, and I can't wait. Hopefully my dad's there and he teaches Braylon how to bet a trifecta.
Wait till she's a little older so she can appreciate it.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So then the move to St. Augustine, it's
more like a vanishing in the night.
perpetuated by your grandparents moved down there. And I guess your mom's looking at this as a chance to, were they helping? Were they just kind of, I didn't pick this up in the book. Was there some sort of financial benefit to St. Augustine, and that would help your mother to live at a lower cost?
So my grandparents,
her parents.
So her stepdad and her mom.
Okay.
My grandfather passed away when I was little, so she had her stepdad and her mom, and so they never approved of my dad.
Okay.
They were always trying to get her to leave him because he wasn't wealthy enough, and I all of us knew that, like, it was about the money. And so when her parents moved to St. Augustine, my mother started making trips to St. Augustine often. Like, they would fly her down, or they would take the train. Back then, it was like, you take the train down. So she would take the train down from New York to Florida. And we didn't know. We just thought she was going to go visit her grandparents. Mm-hmm. But it turns out she was having an affair with the lawyer for the sheriff's department in St. Augustine, where her parents lived.
Gotcha.
And so the taking us in the middle of the night from New York to Florida was the scheme, while my dad was at Army training, was to end the relationship with my dad so she can start this relationship with the man she's been having an affair with. Mm-hmm. And her mother was 100% facilitating that because
your dad's a Yankee.
Not only is he an Italian blue-collar boy, but now she's dating a lawyer who's wealthy and who's going to run for judge in a couple years.
Yeah.
St. Augustine is a very small, good old boy, corrupt town. It still is.
He was like the district attorney in St. Johns County?
He was the attorney for the sheriff's department, so
yeah,
he had his own badge and he was king of the hill. He could do whatever he wanted.
However, your dad still did come down.
Yeah.
And made the move and had to close down his coffee shop.
He closed down the coffee shop. He came down a few months later after selling the house and doing all the things that normally you would do. And we didn't know. I didn't know it was an affair until I had caught my mother with him one night. And my siblings and I were like, who is mom kissing? Who's this guy? And that's when it clicked. She's bamboozling my father. But he came down and he still didn't know. And she made it seem like they were trying to work things out. And at that time we were going to a church called Trinity Chapel, very weird, corrupt church. It was so super weird. And she was a teacher there. And my dad opened another business. He opened a French bakery on the island, and it was magical. And I remember going to the bakery with my dad and all of his kids, and my father was such a good cook, such a good chef. I mean, such an untapped talent that he really could have excelled in if he had any type of real support. But he opened another business, and he tried to make it with my mom, and she blew it up one day and told the principal that my dad had hit her. And we all got pulled out of class, and they called the police, and it was just this craziness. And they ended up arguing in the parking lot. This is in the book, but they ended up arguing in the parking lot. And I was so confused. I'm like, she had this mark on her face, but I know it was my dad. My dad was so in love with my mother. So in love with her. He treated her like a princess. Amongst all of her faults, he still tried to cover for her and fix it. And he would never hit her. Never. 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 And so I knew it was a lie when it was going on. And then they made up. The police left. Nothing happened. My mom went home with my dad, and we all got home. And I was just like, what just happened? It was so crazy. But then I think it was a few days or a few weeks, I can't remember exactly, later, that's when I come home from the school bus, and my dad pulls in, and my mother's on the porch, and then the police show up, and he picks me up, and we're walking inside the house, and he's like, you got the wrong man. I'm walking into my house with my kids, and they're like, put your daughter down, you need to come with us. And it was just this crazy moment that I'll never forget, because my father puts me down. He's like, everything's okay. It's a misunderstanding. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. I knew I was never going to see my father again. They're about to take him away. And sure enough, they cuffed him. They put him in county jail. He had a stroke that day on the way to the courthouse on a trumped-up charge of spousal abuse. Because my mother was having an affair with a very, very powerful man, and you can do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. That's what I've learned. The corruption is so real in this country.
So what is the penalty for spousal abuse? Because it sounds like he was in jail for a long time. Or were there other things that...
No.
I'm not...
They charged him with hitting my mother.
Yeah.
And then they attacked his mental health and said he was too unfit to be a father. And the DCF got involved, and it was just this craziness. And he might have lost his mind at that point a little bit, only because he had been so psychologically tormented by my mother, right? So think about this. You're 35 years old. You have 8 children. You have done nothing but work and provide for your family since you were 18. You start a business, a successful little coffee shop in a very small town, rural town, to only come home one day with all of your kids gone, to have to close the business, sell your house that you've had and worked for since you were 18, to move down to a place with your mother-in-law and father-in-law who clearly hate you, and you know that, to try to make things work with your wife who absolutely berates you, to only a few months later lose your second business and all your kids, and now you're in jail. Yeah. So if that doesn't break a person, I look at it as an adult and how is my father still functioning? My mother broke a person. She broke him. And so I read some of the court documents because my case file is like this big, literally. It's huge. I should have brought it actually. And my father would write these briefs, and he would try to represent himself because lawyers, he just didn't trust anybody at that point, right? But yeah, so it was hard. So they originally put him in jail for domestic violence, and then it just accrued with mental unfitness, and then they hit him with child support, and he couldn't pay the child support. And not that he couldn't pay, but he wouldn't because he knew my mother wasn't going to spend it on us, and he was right.
Yeah.
And so they just charge after charge after charge. So he was in jail, in and out of county jail for a long time. They just kept finding reasons to...
So when he came out, where did he go? If he was in and out?
My grandmother. So his mother,
Okay.
Champy, lived in Vero Beach. So he would go, and she passed away, and she was so wonderful.
She was the one that would fix your bear and your other animals and stuff? Was she the one that would get sewed?
No, that was my godmother.
Your godmother,
But
okay.
she was in New York, so I didn't...
I got you.
That ended. But my grandmother... Italian as Italian gets. I mean, she used to wear a bandana. She was just so Italian. Black jet hair. She was just so magical. I mean, we called her Champy. And so my dad would go down to be with Champy, and he got visitations, and we would do visitation with him, and it was very hard, very, very hard. He tried to get us back. He knew we were being abused. He particularly knew I was being abused, and he went to the court to say that, and the judge would say that he was lying, and then my mother would say, he's crazy, and they really attacked his state of mental health, which is what I've noticed. Hi, baby girl. I know. Do you want to give her a banana? Okay. I've noticed through the last few decades that people will weaponize your mental health if they want to silence you.
Yeah.
That's what they did to my father. And I watched it unfold now in real time, like in the political world. Like, if they want to silence you, they'll attack your mental health and just say that you're crazy.
Did they come? I know he was pleading that they take the case to say, no, it's actually the wife is the one that's probably mentally not well and abusing the children, and they would come and do assessments and talk to you and interview you.
I really wish I brought my case file. Ugh. Okay, so people started, once my father got put in jail, neighbors, people at school were calling DCF about us kids being neglected and abused, because we would have bruises on us, and we would go days without eating, and people would make abuse reports, and but it would always come to nothing because my mother's boyfriend and soon-to-be husband was so powerful that it always gets swept under the rug. And so police would show up and do wellness checks, and we would have social workers show up and do wellness checks, but it amounted to a hill of beans. So from 9 until 16, and all the abuse reports and wellness checks in between meant absolutely nothing, because the corruption is so real. And it wasn't until I was 16 that DCF finally took all of his kids away. But all the damage was done. It was too late.
Folks, you have to read the book. Because there's a lot of things that we're not even doing justice, right, to how well it's written, to how it describes, the abuse, and there's parts at the very beginning that are so well done where you just even mention things like your Care Bear underwear and your brother's Elmo pull-ups that are critical to understanding, like these are children.
Yeah.
Right. And
we're
I'm sure you did that
babes.
on purpose to provide that kind of illustration, that context, right? Of like, and there was another one when you were putting on your nightie. I can't remember what it was, if it was a Barbie nightie or what, but like, wow.
My sisters had
so well written.
New Kids on the Block nighties.
Yeah.
I used to want to wear them, and she would always say no, but I always loved her New Kids on the Block nightie.
So I know I had asked you at the beginning if there was, anything kind of off limits, and I don't necessarily want to touch on the sexual abuse side.
Oh, you have to, because
but you have to, right?
Yeah.
But in doing that, let me set it up by I know you had said most of the characters in the books, the names have been changed. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, I've always it's somewhere when I was in college, I started having this appreciation for when an author, I guess more in fiction, chooses names. There's a lot that goes into the thought of the character name
names
that either
meaning.
Foreshadows or that's the antithesis of, or there's irony. So let's start with Herman Hitchcock, who's the mother's becomes your stepdad eventually. He's the powerful attorney. Why did you choose? His name's not Herman Hitchcock.
No.
Why did you choose to call him Herman Hitchcock? You and whoever helped you write this book.
I wrote it myself.
Okay.
So,
then I'll give you full credit for the genius that you're about to let me know. I
chose the names, and I learned this by reading scripture, that God, when the Lord ended up revealing himself to you and you gave your life to Yahweh, the living God, he changed your name. You are now a new person, a new creature. And I remember reading that in the Old Testament, and how many people he did it with, with Abram to Abraham, and Elijah, and there's just so many places, Joseph, and he just changed their name to make it known that they were now different, and they were a new creature, and they were now his. And so names have so much meaning. And so when I was thinking of names for pseudonyms for my family, to protect my siblings, really, to keep them from I like them to keep their autonomy. I've been always intentional about making sure that you can't pick them out of a crowd, right? You can't. You can't go on social media and try to find them.
Well, not going to look like you.
Yeah, but unless they want to be found. And so Herman Hitchcock came from, he was so vile. He was so wicked. And so what is Hitchcock? Well, if you say the word Hitchcock, it's synonymous with evil, right? You think that, and you think psycho movies and murder and all of these dark things come into your mind. Imagery really plays a part when you say the word Hitchcock. Well, Herman, I used to have all the meanings, but let me look it up real quick. Herman has a meaning. I'm pretty sure it means devilish. And ooh, that thunder.
Yeah, some more storms coming through. Hitchcock also just being a part of the police department, right? And investigation, and just kind of that line of work.
So Herman in Latin means clan. And I guess my thought process was, Herman is an ugly name. He's part of this weird oppressive clan, right? He's got this badge that he would flash around, and he was just this. It's just a seedy name, right? When you say Herman Hitchcock, it sounds seedy, which is appropriate to who this person is in real life.
Yeah,
he is a seedy, creepy, vile person. And so that's why I chose that name. But a lot of the names of my siblings all have meanings too.
There's Raylan, there's Brenly, there's Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's come back to those, but now let's talk about your uncle Talmon. Yeah. So you, somewhere around 9 years old, he's living in the apartment above the house.
Yep, duplex.
And he exposes himself to you, and then that leads into 2, 3, 4 years of sexual abuse. And his name you give is Talmon,
which means oppressed.
Which is oppressed. I guess it was also I guess it was Palestinian era in the West Bank, and it was a town in which it was built by confiscating everything else. So which essentially is taking away, robbing you, right, of your childhood and your dignity and
everything,
and your sanctity, right?
Yeah. So that name is super fitting because that's what he did. He robbed me blind, and he was an oppressor of the worst kind. I mean, there's nothing more oppressive to a child than sexual battery and assault and rape. Nothing. And it's so funny, in my book, the HarperCollins took out close to 70,000 words. The legal team did.
Really?
Yeah. So it's not even the full story. It's the part of the story that's factual, but it's not the full story. And the movie will do such a greater justice to me because there's so much more freedom legally to use movie as a way of depicting something. But I said this in the book and they took it out, so it was never printed. But it is more humane to, and this is controversial, but it's so true, I'm going to say it anyways. It is more humane to end a life with a single bullet to the head than it is to rape a child for years. It is more humane to take that child's life with a bullet than it is to expose them to torturous rape and assault day after day, year after year. period.
And that's interesting because when he confesses,
yeah,
and they ask you, hey, what should his punishment be?
Yeah.
And you said he should suffer the way I did.
Yes.
So why would you let him off easy? Let's just say you put a bullet to his head. John kills him.
I wish.
But you would rather actually him suffer. Those are the times where you would actually say, no, just why don't you just go through periods of neglect and put him in a dark dungeon for a while?
I was 16 and sober-minded when I said this to the state's attorney, and I said he should suffer for a lifetime the way I am.
Yeah.
Because even though the assaults and the rape ended years ago, it took me years and decades, and even now I still have scars on my body. Like, it is a lifetime of healing when you come from that trauma, when you come from that type of violence. It is not, the abuse stopped. And so in our justice system, which is such a falsehood, there's no justice in our justice system because they're decriminalizing child rape. The child rape trade, which people refer to as child sex trafficking or child human trafficking, which that language is in itself desensitizes you from actually what's going on. It's not, there's no such thing as child sex. Sex is between consenting adults, right? Child sex, no such thing. Children cannot consent to sex. It is rape. And so the child rape trade continues to grow and proliferate throughout the world, particularly here in the United States, because the United States is the number one consumer of the child rape trade because they decriminalize it and they give a slap on the wrist. So, for instance, just recently, there was a story out of, was it Utah or Arizona? There was a story where two little girls were raped, a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, by a 50-something-year-old man. He videotaped it, and he got picked up for producing and selling child pornography. He only got 4 years. The judge gave him 4 years in prison, for raping two little girls. I mean, it's just, it's that, and that is a great snapshot of what goes on a daily basis in this country because they have decriminalized child abuse. You can get a slap on the wrist. In my own story, he
got a year's probation.
He got a year probation and that was decades ago. I'm in my 30s now, and that happened when I was 16, when he got finally criminally charged, but it happened when I was 9 to 12. And so,
are there some states that are leading the way, though, where the punishment is more severe?
That's a great question. So I have been advocating for what's known as Christina's Law for years in Texas and in Florida. It is the death penalty for child.
By the way, that's that, right? That bill?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. There's a story behind that, so we'll get to that. But so Christina's Law is the death penalty for child rapists for children under 12, because in most states, a capital felony is for children 12 and under. A capital felony means the death penalty should be already on the table, but mostly it's lifetime imprisonment. So he should have gotten that. And my case started out as a capital felony. So he started out with a maximum punishment of lifetime behind bars. But it got pleaded all the way down, which is what happens with these DAs who are so just corrupt and they want to bag a case. They just let it plead down so they can chalk it up to them, getting the victory. Well, it wasn't a victory for anyone because not only did he abuse me, but he abused other little girls, and that's known fact.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And I guarantee you, because there's no rehabilitating pedophiles. It's not possible. If you read any of the data, any of the studies that are out there, there is no rehabilitating that type of dysfunction. None. You can't put them in jail for 30 years and have them come back out. They will abuse more children. So I guarantee you he's abused more children over the years. He's since moved states. He's in, I think, Tennessee now. But so he got a year in county jail and some community service. And I continue to fight for my healing and for my well-being every day, based on what he did to me when I was 9.
And meanwhile, the stats, I know when Bishop T.D. Jakes interviewed you, the stat you guys shared was like 1 in 4
sexually
are
abused.
sexually abused. I saw 1 in 6. I mean, sometimes it's hard to know the
numbers,
source.
Yep.
It's every, I want to say 68 seconds, 450,000 a year, which is crazy. And then with all this anti-bullying and all these things were seemingly were protecting children.
No.
But apparently we're not.
I mean, look what's going on right now in this last month of Pride.
Yeah.
All I have seen is child sexual abuse. You can flash a little girl in a pride parade and it's considered empowerment and you being inclusive. But if you do that alone in your bedroom, then you're a pedophile? Get out of here. You're a pedophile either way, buddy.
Yeah.
But they're sanctioning it. Again, the last 2 decades have been, and I've said this loudly in all my platforms throughout the country, they have been normalizing pedophilia and they have been decriminalizing it by and large on a national level. I mean, if you look at the crimes that come out and you see what is going on with our children being consumed and the perpetrators, what they get after they do this heinous thing, it's not equal. That's why Christina's law just passed in Florida, which is a funny story how that happened. I'd been advocating it for Christina's law at the federal and state level for many years. It's what I created because of my own story. I was so tired of having to see all of the injustice and all the stories from all these kids that I work with and hear from throughout the country. And, it's what's fair. If you do this horrible, heinous thing to a child, you should die. That is the fair consequence to such a heinous, wicked cruelty. There's nothing more cruel than to rape a child. Nothing. And you should die for it. And so HB 1297 was born out of my opponent in the primary. So last year I ran for office in Jacksonville, where I'm from, against a very corrupt family and multimillionaire establishment Republican corrupt family. Her husband runs the racket on Republican candidates in the GOP in that area. And so basically, if he's not your political consultant, you're not going to get in. And he'll the way that they destroy grassroots candidates who don't sign up for them is really awful. But that's politics, which I didn't know. I had no idea. I was so green. I thought politics was anyone who cares about their country and who's honest and hardworking can do anything.
Right.
I was so oblivious to actually how the political machine works. I had no idea what we were signing up for. None. I mean, these people literally told in their mailers and commercials, told people I was a California liberal, that I was against, that I was for child immigration, which is complete antithesis. I mean, what's going on at the border right now is causing so much damage to children in the child rape trade. It makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy Google search to see where I stand on policies and certain things. But anyways, they fabricated an entire person saying that I was this person and I wasn't. And so my platform was Christina's Law. That's what I campaigned on all my stump speeches. That's what I, told people that I was going to, do my first bill on the floor would be to advocate for Christina's Law for the death penalty for child rapists. Because I thought crime was the number one issue in Jacksonville, because it is. And yeah, so that's what I campaigned on. And so my opponent, to stick it to me after, the horrible election, she took that bill to the floor. So her very first bill was Christina's Law.
Wow. And
she didn't name it Christina's Law, but she took my entire proposal that I had given to Florida leadership.
She just calling it HB 1297.
Yeah. And I talk about this. And so Gateway Pundit did the story because they found out about this. This is the highest political plagiarism that you can get to, is to rob a childhood rape victim of her life's work. And yeah, so that's what happened. So Governor DeSantis just signed it into law last month, and that's my life's work. And
wow.
And it's hard because there's this wicked woman who used it as political points, right? Makes her look good. Now the governor uses it as a talking point for his presidential campaign. These people they don't care where it came from. They don't care that law, that proposal came out of years of immense hardship for me.
Yeah.
You know, to them, it's just a political football that they can kick and say, oh, look what we did.
Is it only going to change if some of the highest ranking people in this country have this happen to them, where it's their niece or their daughter or their granddaughter before, like, somebody wakes up?
Yeah, I
and
think
we actually put people in jail longer. It's one thing, well, obviously your law, but let's say it doesn't reach that, but at least jail time or something. As it just has to happen.
Everyone always thinks, so in the world, in our current public view, I feel like, in my opinion, most people think the child rape trade and child rape and human trafficking or child trafficking only happens to, like, the poor and the outsiders in third world countries. They don't understand that it is foster care system here is really pushing it to the brink. You can't, if you look at the data and the statistics, and I'm included in that, because I was considered familial human trafficking because my mother allowed him to rape me for as a charge for babysitting. Like, that was like how it was worked out. And so typically most human trafficking is familia. It's family that barters you for a certain something. It's not this far off third world country that, you know, these little kids are being robbed from villages. Yes, it happens, but by and large, it is moms, dads, grandparents, uncles, aunts selling nieces, nephews, daughters, sons into pedophilia for the highest bidder to make money. Like, that's what's happening here in America. And so I think that narrative where it's like, it's only happening in these dark third world countries, and it's such a farce.
Yeah.
No, it's happening in your neighborhood. I mean, right here in Huntsville, it's happening. Children are being bought and sold on the black market. That's what's going on. And now it's almost mainstream because parents are doing it and they're making a lot of money, and it's so wicked and evil. And how do you combat that? Well, you've got to talk about it in the open. Well, who's talking about it? Not a lot of people. And so I think in order to really make a change, I think if it happens to someone who's notable, maybe they'll take up the fight, the war for our kids, because it is a real war, and it gets so dark. It's so dark real quick, and it's so prevalent that it can almost be overwhelming because you can't fight it. It's too much. There's too much going on. It's so hard to combat it all. But yeah, I think if the federal, which is why I fight for at the federal level, for a harsher punishment for child rape should be the death penalty. That's the fair consequence. And if someone at the federal level picked it up, then it would make a difference because, you know, there is such a thing as crime of opportunity, right? And deterring crime with punishment. And that's a real thing. Some people will be deterred from harming a child if they think they could die, right? But some don't care. Some are going to hurt that child anyways because they truly do not care for anything.
You know, and it seemed to me that the worst of the abuse in the book came when you told your mother, finally have the courage to tell her, hey, Talmon is abusing me sexually. And that's what led to being locked in the closet.
Yep.
And
tried to kill myself.
Tried to kill yourself, and you couldn't even do that.
Nope.
And so that was a very, very...
couldn't read, couldn't write, and couldn't suicide myself.
And your sister's bringing you...
bowls of mac and cheese.
Yeah, and it's like you kind of talk about where you became like an animal in a way. Like it's just dehumanizing.
I was treated like an animal for a long time, and so, you know, I just succumbed to it. I succumbed to that truth, right?
Yeah.
I was so tired of fighting. I didn't want to live anymore. What was I living for? To be raped in this closet and to be beaten in this one? I was tired. And so, after I told my mother, hi, sweet girl, it's okay. You're doing so good. I know, you want milkies. Okay. That's sign. The sign, it's sign for milk. I know, you're a sweet girl.
She's smiling at you too.
Yeah, she loves mommy. I love you. You're so sweet. But I told my mother because there was conversation about him moving in to the house, and I was so terrified. And I knew he was abusing my sisters.
Okay.
And so it was like, no, like I could not let this happen. That's why I ended up telling her, because I was so afraid she was going to let her brother move in. And what was he going to do to my little sisters again? I couldn't. So I told her, I knew deep down she was going to beat me. I knew she was going to hurt me. And she did. She did so many heinous things to me after that. The abuse got so much worse after I told her that. It was awful. She threatened to have me Baker acted, said I was a liar, all these things. And it's sad because my older sister, Ariel, who I'm very close with in the book, she's named Raylan. The meaning of that name, I think, is sunshine. And Ariel and I are very close, and she remembers this all going down because she was the oldest. And she remembers beating me up because she thought I was lying. And then she remembers sitting in the living room and hearing my mother, my grandmother, and him admit to it. And she was devastated because her and Talmon were best friends.
Yeah, that's right. You said she was in the room.
She was in the room, and she's the one who ended up telling me years later how they tried to cover it all up and how she could not believe.
Was she being abused by Talmon?
No.
Oh, she wasn't. Okay.
They were like
tight.
battle buddies. They were like friends. You know, they did stuff together. But he was abusing me and my two younger sisters.
Okay.
I'm sure with other little girls in the neighborhood, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, it was, and my sister feels so bad. She apologizes sometimes still. She's like, I'm so sorry I beat you up that one time. I'm like, it's okay.
But they basically engineered the cover up.
Yeah.
And that he would not be able to move in.
Yep.
So basically.
And they would keep us separated.
And the abuse stopped.
That's sexual abuse, yeah.
Okay.
That did. But the physical and the emotional and psychological got so much worse. Like 1,000 times worse.
So I want to get to Miss California so that people can better understand all of this stuff. Like, wait a minute, she was running for office, and how is this possible, right? But I do think it's important where you basically, it all comes to a head when you're about 16.
Yeah.
And the state finally steps in and takes you away from your mother.
Finally. It only took them how many years?
Even though, I shouldn't say we should skip ahead because I think one of the most pivotal parts of this is when your mother tried to kill herself. Yeah. And she's drinking the liquid Vicodin and she, I guess, also can't kill herself. She tries. But you loved her. You felt bad for her.
I called 911.
You called 911. You hid the gun.
Yep.
Because she says, and this is just awful to think, to this, hey, I'm going to pull the trigger on this Colt 45 or whatever it was tonight and, blow my brains out.
Yep.
And you guys all have to hear this. Yet you stepped in as kind of a mother. Do you want to take a break?
No, I can just hold her.
Okay.
Come here, baby. Bring her to me. She wants mommy.